Kyle Busch calls out Corey Lajoie speaking to the media this past weekend. Rusty Wallace joined a Fox Sports booth at Dover, and Bubba Wallace takes responsibility for the last lap crash at Talladega. What's going on, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead by start talking about Joey Logano. As it was announced yesterday, Joey Logano is going to run a throwback to Mark Donahue's 1973 paint scheme at Darlington. This looks really awesome. I think they did an absolutely incredible job. I love the red, white, and blue. It gives me those old school throwback vibes, especially one that Ryan Newman ran in 2003. Penske did a really awesome and a solid job on it, and I'm definitely looking forward to see it out on the racetrack at Darlington. They did a really awesome job, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about McLaren Custom Grills. As it was reported yesterday by Joe Strictly, TobyChristie.com, and also Parker Kligerman, that the McLaren Custom Grills website actually crashed. Obviously, McLaren Custom Grills was the sponsor that Kyle Busch had this past weekend at Talladega, and they ended up winning the race. And a lot of people were really interested on those McLaren Custom Grills. It was really awesome seeing a new sponsor come in and win. And it's crazy to see that a website basically crashed because the driver ended up winning. That doesn't always happen all the time, so that is amazing to see. But congratulations nonetheless to Kyle Busch on picking up the victory. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Talladega. As reported by Chris Knight, that it was reported by him that Talladega had the largest Cup crowd at Talladega since the 2008 season. It's believed to be the largest crowd since the 2008 season for the spring or the fall race. That is absolutely amazing, and the crowd looked absolutely packed, and it looked absolutely stacked. We saw a lot of people in the infield especially. There were fights in the infield in the boulevard, and just seeing so many people at Talladega, the energy I saw was amazing. I saw some pretty good crowd noise that Fox brought as well on their coverage. There were other things that I wasn't a big fan of Fox, but nonetheless, great crowd for the event, and amazing to see that it was the largest crowd for that event in a long time. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Pitbull. Now, it was basically put a tweet out by Tracka showing that Pitbull was making a music video in the Talladega infield, a song that he has with Little John. Just incredible to see. Of course, Pitbull's been involved in the sport and getting involved in the sport a lot more. Of course, a co-owner of Trackhouse Racing. Just amazing to see overall that Pitbull is making a music video, and it's absolutely incredible to see that. I wonder if that will be part of the upcoming when that video will be released, but nonetheless, amazing to see that. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Chase Elliott and Jeff Burton. As it was announced over the last couple of days, on Friday it was announced that Chase Elliott would be inducted into the top 75 greatest drivers of all time. And it was announced yesterday, Harrison Burton basically announced this to his dad, that he was also inducted into the top 75 greatest drivers as well. Both of them, in my opinion, have earned the honor of getting to the top 75 greatest drivers. Chase Elliott, already a NASCAR Cup Series champion, winner of 18 races, and also winner of the champion of the 2014 NASCAR Xfinity Series. Jeff Burton won a lot of races in his time as well. I think both of them have earned the right to get into the top 75 greatest drivers. Now they're the 10th and 11th ones to get in, and congratulations to both of them on getting inducted into the top 75 greatest NASCAR drivers of all time. They both have earned and deserved it. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. As Kyle Larson spoke to the media this past weekend, and he thought that he was in trouble when he got a call from Mike Helton. Turns out it was a call about the top 75 greatest drivers list. Kyle Larson, about a week or two ago, was inducted into the top 75 greatest drivers list. And it's just funny here that Kyle Larson thought he was getting in trouble. And he thought he was getting in trouble because of the contact he had with Ryan Preece, and how frustrated he was with Ryan Preece as well. Turns out it was just a really good call and nothing serious there. It's just funny to see Kyle Larson speaking to media. Of course, he won at Martinsville. He had some issues though at Bristol Dirt with Ryan Preece. But still, it's great to see Kyle Larson get in the top 75 greatest drivers list. It's just really funny to see that Kyle Larson thought he was getting in trouble. Just great to see that Larson was inducted into the top 75 list because he absolutely deserves it, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Motorsports Games. As it was reported by Nathan Brown, talking about Motorsports Games. Obviously, we talk about Motorsports Games quite a bit on this channel. There's been a lot of turmoil and a lot of struggle with the company. Well, Nathan Brown put out a tweet earlier today, and Mark Miles says, I'm aware of the ongoing conversations that, if successful, will lead to ensuring that MSG is on a solid financial ground. I have no clue what Mark Miles is smoking or what he's taking, but Mark Miles should see the bigger picture. Motorsports Games is absolutely in a lot of shambles, and there's a lot of big things that are wrong with this company. They made some big moves on the inside with Stephen Hood, of course, taking over the company and taking back the company once again, with Dmitry Kosko no longer the CEO of the company. But even with the move, you still got Dmitry Kosko part of that, and everything that's been going on Motorsports Games, I don't know what Mark Miles can see that we're not seeing, because everything we've seen about Motorsports Games has been negativity and really, really bad. And I just do not like the fact that he cannot see the bigger picture and see all the issues right now going on with this company. There's a lot of major problems, there's a lot of major issues, and a lot of things that are completely wrong with this company that I'm surprised that he could see something that we're not seeing. I just wish that he could see the bigger picture and get out of this contract immediately. He needs to give iRacing back their license and get out of the contract as soon as possible, because if he does that, I think that he can lead this, he can help with getting the IndyCar game back, because again, I think MSG is going to fall. I just think there's been a lot of negativity going on, and there could be some really bad things going on the horizon. Honestly, I don't know what he sees that we see, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Frankie Mantis. As we're talking about Frankie Mantis today, because Frankie Mantis, in all craziness, is actually leading the ARCA points right now. Frankie Mantis had 3 top 10 finishes so far this season, a 11th place finish at Daytona, a 6th place finish a couple weekends ago at Phoenix, and a 9th place finish this past weekend at Talladega. It's just incredible to see that Frankie Mantis is the points leader right now. And Frankie's definitely taking this really, really seriously. And to see that he's able to accomplish or been able to do what he's been able to do with not a lot of experience, I think is just absolutely phenomenal and absolutely incredible. I don't know if he's going to win the championship this year, but it's just really surreal and awesome to see that he's the current points leader at the moment right now. And congratulations to Frankie Mantis on currently leading the points in the NASCAR, in the ARCA series currently at the moment. Massive congratulations to him on that. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Blaine Perkins. As it was announced last night that Blaine Perkins has been officially discharged from the hospital. This is amazing news. For those who did not watch the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, you saw the scary accident that happened near the end of stage number 2. We had Dexter Stacey spin into the inside wall really, really hard. He spoke to the media after that, and Blaine Perkins basically flipped up 6 or 7 times. Luckily for Blaine Perkins, he was able to walk away, but he had a little bit of assistance and was brought to the hospital as in case of precaution. It is just amazing to see after a very scary and a very nasty crash. We had 6 or 7 times he basically rolled over. It's amazing to see he's been discharged from the hospital. It's unclear yet if he's going to be racing this upcoming week or not. They've not announced at the time that he'll be racing this weekend. We don't know at this time. But nonetheless, really happy to see that Blaine Perkins has been discharged from the hospital. I was really concerned about him yesterday, and I'm really happy to see he's been discharged from the hospital. Really good news. Just a really scary incident and a really scary wreck, and happy to hear that he has been discharged from the hospital. Really good news right there. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Chase Briscoe. Now, after the NASCAR Cup Series race this past weekend at Talladega, Chase Briscoe spoke to the media, and he said that he was in a lot of pain, and basically talked about the spin as well that happened. He said after he was screaming and howling in a lot of pain after the race. This, of course, he had surgery this past week before we got this weekend at Talladega. He had surgery on Monday and basically said he had a lot of pain. I think he stuck his hand out, felt a lot of pain, and was screaming on the radio. Hopefully, Chase Briscoe can continue his recovery process. Again, he's still expected to be racing going forward over the next 5 or 6 weeks, and it's going to take some time for his hand and his arm to basically recover. To go through that pain is just absolutely crazy, and I'm really happy to see that he at least is okay after the race. But just to hear that he was in a lot of pain, just, man, I mean, to hear it, that's absolutely wild and absolutely crazy to hear that he was in a lot of pain after the race. So at least he's okay going forward. I hope he can continue racing going forward, but it doesn't sound like he'll be out of the car going forward. But just crazy to hear that he was in a lot of pain after the race. And now we're going ahead to jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're talking about Greg Van Alst. As it was announced during the ARCA race that Greg Van Alst is going to make his NASCAR Xfinity Series debut later this year at Atlanta Motor Speedway, driving for Alpha Prime Racing. Now, it had been initially announced he was going to run at Richmond or another race a couple weeks down the road, but now it's officially confirmed that he is going to run with Alpha Prime Racing at Atlanta Motor Speedway. This is absolutely huge. Greg Van Alst has been working for many, many years and for a long time to get this opportunity. And for Tommy Joe to give Greg Van Alst, one of the hardest working guys in this industry, a huge opportunity to go out there and make his Xfinity Series debut with Alpha Prime, I think is not only phenomenal, but I think it's absolutely incredible. And he has 100% earned this right and this opportunity to get a chance to do this. He's earned it. I'm so happy for him. I hope he can contend for the win. It'd be incredible in his debut in Xfinity if he can go out there and win. It's unclear. I think the number he's going to run is a 45 car, if I'm not mistaken. We're not sure about that yet. But nonetheless, a massive congratulations to Greg Van Alst getting this opportunity. He has not only earned it, but I think he absolutely deserves the opportunity and the chance to drive in the Xfinity Series at Atlanta Motor Speedway. I think he's going to do an awesome and a really good job. To be honest, I'm excited to see that he's getting the opportunity to race in the Xfinity Series. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we're going to go ahead and talk about Noah Gragson. Now, if you watched the NASCAR Cup Series race, you saw the second to last crash. And it was a really, really big wreck. We're going to talk about the other side of the story with Ryan Preece and Kyle Larson here just a little bit. But Noah Gragson spoke to the media after that, and he basically took responsibility for the crash. So if you watched the Cup Series race yesterday, you saw the wreck. I think that there are two people at fault for the crash. First of all, I think Ross is sending it 3 wide. I think he has to take some responsibility there. But Noah Gragson then came down, and that's where the wreck actually initially happened, where Noah Gragson came down, and that's when the big incident happened. To me, like I just said a second ago, I think two people are at fault for the crash. One of them goes to Noah Gragson, like I said, because Gragson came down on Ross Chastain. And Noah, again, takes responsibility for the wreck in that incident. He didn't think that Ross was going to make that move. But again, it is super speed racing, and you're going for a win. And you may not have a lot of opportunities and chances to make moves like that, so can't really blame Ross Chastain for trying to make a move. Because like I said, he's going for the win and trying to get his first win in a year, because his last win came a year ago at Talladega, basically a year ago to this day. So I can't blame Ross Chastain for making the move in that situation. But it's really good to see Noah Gragson taking responsibility for the wreck. Again, I think it's not fully Noah Gragson's fault. I think it's a mixture of both Noah Gragson and Ross Chastain in this situation. Nonetheless, though, both are okay, which is really, really good to see. And just a really scary incident that happened. We'll talk about the other side here in a second. But nonetheless, just a very scary incident. And luckily, everyone is okay in the situation of that wreck. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Anthony Alfredo. As after Alfredo was involved in a very, very big wreck near the end of stage number 2, Anthony Alfredo was speaking to media, and he basically called out all the younger drivers and the kids in the series, basically saying all these kids don't really know what they're doing. What's really interesting about Anthony Alfredo is Anthony Alfredo is only 2 years older than the driver who caused the incident. Derek Kraus is 21, will turn 22 later this year, and Anthony Alfredo is only 2 years older than Derek Kraus. But it's interesting because I can't blame Anthony Alfredo for being really, really frustrated. Anthony had one of the best cars early in the race, and I think he could have contended for the win on Saturday. But unfortunately, getting involved in that wreck took him out of contention to go for the victory. And I think it's just a product of Super Speedway and inexperience of Derek Kraus, because this was Derek Kraus's third NASCAR Xfinity Series start. And in the previous 2 races, I think Derek Kraus had done a really good job. Yes, he did make a mistake, but Derek Kraus is trying to form the best he can and go for a position. I think if he had a little more experience, I don't think Derek Kraus makes that same mistake. But I also can't blame Anthony Alfredo being frustrated either, because Anthony Alfredo genuinely ran really good on these super speedways. He was one of the fastest cars in Atlanta and could have had a shot to win Daytona as well. So I don't blame Anthony Alfredo for being frustrated and upset. Again, you're going to make some moves, you're going to make some mistakes, and I think if Derek Kraus, like I said, had a little more experience, I don't think Derek Kraus makes that same mistake. Nonetheless, so it is what it is. I can't blame Anthony for being upset. There's only 4 people on that team. They don't have a lot of cars. And nonetheless, I cannot blame Anthony Alfredo for being really, really frustrated and really upset about the wrecks. I'd be upset too if I got taken out of contention in a race early in the going. I can't blame him for being upset, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode, as we are talking about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Brad Keselowski. Now, a story that kind of went a little bit bigger than it probably should have gotten was basically a story with Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Brad Keselowski, because earlier in the week, RFK made a decision to basically take the 47 cars pit crew and move it over to 17 pit crew except the fueler. And Ricky Stenhouse Jr. spoke to the media. He was not very happy about it. And he spoke to the media once again on Saturday and said he was not very happy and frustrated that they made the move, and also said it is what it is. Then Brad Keselowski responded later to me, and he says that wish Stenhouse would have talked to him about it. And then Brad tweeted later, basically saying that we have 30 pit crew members on our team, and I can't understand why Stenhouse is really frustrated, because Brad Keselowski makes the control, and he's in control of the pit crew members. Because what's interesting is the 47 team is taking the pit crew members from RFK, which is interesting because if I'm not mistaken, it used to be the other way around where JTG Doherty Racing used to get pit crew members from Joe Gibbs Racing. I guess things changed in 2023 where now they're taking pit crew members from RFK Racing. I'm a little surprised too that this became a bigger story because it's actually something that is kind of normal sometimes to see teams make moves with the smaller organizations, and sometimes they're going to see frustration build up. That is just a normal thing. But like I said, I agree with Keselowski. I am a little surprised that this became a bigger story than it ended up becoming. Nonetheless, though, I get Ricky Stenhouse Jr. seems being really frustrated because Ricky's been having generally a really good year this year, a better year than normal, and I can't blame him for being upset, don't get me wrong. I'm just a little surprised this became a bigger story than it ended up becoming. That being said, though, I hope that they can kind of work this out. Hope things don't get worse going forward between both of them, and nonetheless, hope things can work out going forward in the foreseeable future. But nonetheless, it's interesting to hear what happened there, and nonetheless, crazy stuff to hear that there was frustration. I can't blame Stenhouse for being frustrated and upset, but at the same token, same time, I'm kind of surprised this became a bigger story than it ended up actually becoming. And now we're going to jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Chandler Smith versus Jeb Burton. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Xfinity Series race, you saw Jeb Burton pick up his first victory in 2 years and get Jordan Anderson Racing their first victory as an organization in NASCAR. Chandler Smith, though, after the race kind of overshadowed that a little bit because he spoke to the media after race and he called Jeb Burton out, basically saying that Jeb Burton was not the sharpest tool in the shed. Now, Jeb Burton later, after speaking to media after winning, he basically kind of called out Chandler Smith as well and calls him an idiot and says he's not going to basically survive long-term in the sport and will not get too far in NASCAR going forward if he continues to make stupid moves like that. Chandler Smith responded later on social media and basically said, "Glad you're still thinking about me. Congratulations to your team." It's really interesting to see that Chandler Smith and Jeb Burton are frustrated with each other after. And I can't blame Chandler Smith being frustrated for the wreck stuff, but don't think Jeb Burton was really at fault for that. Chandler Smith also is younger and inexperienced and also made a lot of mistakes as well. And it's interesting to hear that Chandler Smith did call out Jeb Burton after the race, considering the fact that I don't think that Chandler Smith, again, they were near each other at points in the race, and Chandler had a fast car all day, while also Jeb Burton, I think, had one of the best cars in the race as well. And it's also interesting to hear that Jeb Burton was calling out Chandler Smith as well after the race as well. Nonetheless, though, it's interesting that Jeb Burton called him an idiot. Jeb Burton's also in the past made a lot of mistakes as a race car driver, so he's been an idiot in the past as well. So we can't completely talk about being innocent in the situation because he's made a lot of dumb mistakes in his career as well. But he's a much older driver, so he doesn't make as many of those same mistakes as we've seen in the past. Nonetheless, so it's very interesting to see the frustration from both drivers, and it's definitely very interesting to see for sure, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. As I believe it was reported by Nathan Brown from the Indy Star, Kyle Larson will have his seat fitted for the 2024 Indianapolis 500 and will attempt practice day next month at Indianapolis. Obviously, next month is the 2023 Indianapolis 500, but he will not compete in the 2023 Indy 500. He's going to compete in the 2024 Indy 500, but not only that, he's going to compete in the 2025 Indianapolis 500 as well with Arrow McLaren. Kyle Larson next year is going to be trying to accomplish something that not many drivers have done and is win his first Indianapolis 500 in the 2024 season. And we're looking to also sweep by winning the Indy 500 and the Coke 600 on the same day in 2024. And I think getting that a little experience and getting that practice is going to be really important for Kyle Larson to get. I'm obviously a little bit shocked and surprised he's not going to run an IndyCar race sometime this year, just to get a little more experience for that. But being at that practice day for the Indy 500 makes a lot of sense. And I think with how fast McLaren was, especially last year in the 2022 Indianapolis 500, where they almost won, where Paddleboard was one of the strongest cars there, they unfortunately got beat by the Ganassi team. You'd have to imagine that Larson is probably going to be really competitive in next year's Indy 500. But I think getting this experience and getting prepared for that event is going to really help him a lot. And I expect that Larson is going to be extremely competitive in the practice sessions as well, because he has a lot of open wheel experience. And I think if there's anybody behind the wheel of a Cup car right now, maybe besides Kyle Busch, that could get in an IndyCar and I think be competitive right from the back, I think it's a guy like Kyle Larson. But it is important, like I said, for him to get that experience and get prepared for that event. So it makes a lot of sense. I'm glad he's going to go out there and try to get that experience, get prepared for it, and I think that Larson will be very, very fast in the sessions, and I think he'll have a really good chance and a really good shot to win the 2024 Indy 500. I also think he can win in 2025 as well. If he doesn't win 2024, I think he could easily win 2025 as well. But I'm excited to see that Larson will be at a practice session. They're not too far down the road, and we're about a month away from the 2023 Indy 500, but Larson will be getting some experience, likely for the 2024 Indy 500 with McLaren. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the drivers. Now, the drivers over the last weeks have been extremely negative, but now the drivers actually had a lot of positive things to say about NASCAR in the last week, and Kelly Crandall put out a really interesting story around that. Multiple drivers, including Kevin Harvick and Joe Logano, says that negative stories always overshadow the positive stories. Brad Keselowski says that he's optimistic on the future of NASCAR, and Denny Hamlin says and left the meeting that they had about the short track package, among other things, really optimistic. And according to Jeff Gluck, he spoke basically on his recent Teardown podcast, and apparently there are some changes that are coming to the short track package as well. See, we always talk about a lot of negative stories, but we don't always talk about the positive stories. Unlike a few years ago when you had a lot of drivers felt like they were frustrated and we all thought there potentially was going to be a split in the sport a few years ago, how everyone was really frustrated, especially with the Atlanta decisions that they made in 2021. It's good to see the drivers do feel a little bit more optimistic about the future. And even though there's been a lot of negativity around the sport and a lot of negative things that have come out of the sport, especially in the last 2 years, I think that this sport does have a really, really positive future. Granted, there are things about this next-gen car that definitely do need to be worked on. I don't think the super speed package really needs to be worked on. I wish there was a little more 3 wide, but I enjoyed the race yesterday. And I think that even though the short track racing could definitely be better, I think the sport definitely is headed toward the right direction on that front. But I really hope they can get that fixed. But as a fan of NASCAR, even though sometimes I'm frustrated as a fan, I really love to see the optimism because, again, we've seen a lot of negativity in the sport over the last 2 years, but there's also been a lot of great positivity in the sport. We've seen a lot of great things, and I think that this sport can really turn things around, and I love that the drivers do feel optimistic about the long-term future of NASCAR, and hopefully we can continue having this optimism because I want the sport to see long-term, and I think fans of NASCAR and the racing world we need NASCAR to continue to succeed for the future of racing in general, so I love it. Drivers are optimistic. I hope we continue having a lot of more optimism going forward, and I just hope that this continues because I love when the sport has a really bright future. I think the sport can survive long term, and I love that the sport does have a lot of optimism going forward. So hopefully that continues going forward. We see a lot of great optimism, and things continue heading toward a really bright future going forward. So I love this. I'm happy to see this, and overall, hopefully the optimism continues in the sport going forward, to be honest with you. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Ryan Preece and Kyle Larson. Now, we talk about one side of the big wreck that happened with basically in the first overtime crash where Noah Gragson took responsibility for the wreck and Ross Chastain was also involved. We didn't talk about the other side of the wreck, and that was Ryan Preece and Kyle Larson's section of the wreck. So I believe Kyle Larson got turned, by Kyle Busch or someone else, and Kyle Larson got clipped in the side of his car, and Ryan Preece also got clipped in that wreck as well. Now, they spoke to the media after the race, and Ryan Preece says that is the hardest hit that he's ever taken in his racing career. Since he started racing about 10 or 15 years ago, he says that's the hardest hit that he's ever taken in his career. Kyle Larson also reacted to the wreck, and he basically said that he is fine. He also says that he's lucky to not get anything inside of his car. When you look at the damage of the Kyle Larson wreck, it is extremely bad. The good news is it was not on the door side of his car, basically the driver's side of his car. But that was an extreme amount of damage. Luckily, with the door side, where the driver's side is, there basically is a lot more reinforcement on that side of the car. So we are extremely lucky that was not on the driver's side of the car. The next-gen car does have some safety issues, but at least on this side, it did its right job. But it's extremely crazy to see how much damage Kyle Larson had. And we're lucky that no one else got extremely, because we had, especially how bad the Xfinity race was, some of the wrecks we saw. I think we are extremely lucky that it wasn't worse than it really ended up being. And I'm glad to see both Ryan Preece and Kyle Larson were able to walk away. And Larson's had some pretty crazy wrecks, especially since the beginning of the next-gen era. So I'm glad both drivers are okay. There's no serious injuries to both of them, but the Larson wreck especially, they got to do something about the side of that car. And like I said, we're lucky that it wasn't on the driver's side and it was on the other side of the car, the passenger's side. Nonetheless, I'm glad everyone was okay in the incident. Everyone was okay from the wrecks, and happy that everyone was all good and okay. But just an extremely crazy and bizarre and crazy and strange incident that happened at Talladega. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next major story in today's episode, as we are talking about Rusty Wallace. As it was announced during the broadcast in stage number 3 that Rusty Wallace is going to join the Fox Sports booth this weekend at Dover International Speedway. Now, Rusty Wallace has done broadcasting in the past. In fact, he actually currently works at MRN currently at the moment on the radio. But the last time that Rusty Wallace was on TV was with NASCAR and ESPN. So unlike a lot of people been in the broadcast booth just on a part-time, Rusty Wallace had a lot of experience at ESPN. He worked at ESPN from 2007 to 2014. And like I mentioned, he worked with MRN. Now, I'm going to be perfectly honest with you guys. Rusty Wallace was an okay commentator on ESPN, but he wasn't great. From what I hear, he actually does a really good job on MRN. And I think with having a little more experience at MRN now, Rusty might be able to provide a lot more insight and a lot of great analysis, considering Rusty was also pretty successful at Dover. And I think with that TV experience, unlike a lot of people that come in, I think Rusty could have a pretty easy job doing a really solid job overall. It's been interesting to see the people they brought into the Fox broadcast booth this year. Tony Stewart's been in the most, but you've also had other people in the booth. Chase Elliott's been in at points. Gunther Steiner, Kurt Busch have been in the booth, and you've also had other people in the booth this year, like Bobby Labonte. Again, Tony Stewart's been in there the most, but we've seen a lot of different people. But Rusty has the most TV experience of anybody that's been in the booth so far, that's been a guest commentator so far. So I wonder if this is going to be the only time he's in there, because again, it is an off week for MRN, and PRN is basically taking over the coverage for this week, because I think it's an ISC race and not an SMI race, I think. So it's very interesting to see that we're going to have Rusty in the booth. I hope Rusty can do a really, really good job providing that analysis and providing that insight, because like I said, he's had a lot of success at Dover, and I'm glad to see that Rusty's getting the opportunity to get into the broadcast booth this week, and hopefully he can do a really, really good job and bring a lot of that analysis. But I'm happy to see that Rusty will be joining the broadcast booth this weekend at Dover International Speedway. I hope he can do a really awesome job. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next major story of today's episode, as we're talking about Bubba Wallace and Ryan Blaney. Now, if you watch the NASCAR Cup Series race at Talladega Superspeedway, you saw the last overtime wreck. As we're coming to the white flag of this race, Kyle Busch had to race lead, but Bubba Wallace and Ryan Blaney, both of them, got really incredibly and really strong runs near the end of the race to make a move for the race lead. Then Ryan Blaney dived to the inside, and Bubba Wallace came down and blocked Ryan Blaney multiple times coming into turn number 1. And they both ended up crashing each other out, and Kyle Busch snuck through and ended up taking the victory. Now, in regards to that, Bubba Wallace actually blocked Ryan Blaney, I believe, 2 or 3 times in that last lap incident. Now, Bubba Wallace did show a little bit of frustration getting out of the car, but after that, he did not really show any frustration at all. And actually, when he spoke to the media, he actually took responsibility for the incident and for the wreck. Now, a lot of people I saw were crucifying Bubba Wallace on social media, and yes, he did cause the last lap wreck. However, I am not going to crucify Bubba Wallace in this situation. Instead, I'm going to say this. This is the last lap, and Bubba's going for his first win of the season. And I can't blame Bubba Wallace for making the moves that he made. Did he have the block 2 or 3 times? No, absolutely not. But Bubba Wallace, like I said, I mentioned, he's going for a win. And it's the last lap of the race. And you're going to do what you're going to do to go for these wins. If he doesn't make the same mistakes, he probably goes in. He and Ryan Blaney are going for the win. But nonetheless, and also you have to think about this. I think in this situation, Bubba Wallace showed a lot of maturity. And he and Ryan Blaney are really, really good buddies and really, really good friends. And they're not going to be pissed off at each other. He actually, like I said, he took responsibility for the incident and I think handled it with a lot of class and handled it with a lot of maturity. And I think we've seen Bubba Wallace at times where he hasn't really handled the class and handled maturity. Look at Coda. He was really frustrated. He said he should be replaced after Circuit of the Americas, after a couple really, really bad races. But I feel like there's times that Bubba Wallace can show that maturity and can show his coolness behind the wheel. And in this situation, well, yes, it was his fault for the last lap wreck and the last lap incident. I think he handled it very, very well. And he's going for a win. I can't blame Bubba Wallace for trying to block and go for that win because this could be his only shot to win. No, will say a couple weeks down the road to Kansas, I think he's going to absolutely be a favorite at that racetrack. Nonetheless, so I really love the fact that Bubba Wallace handled it very, very maturely, handled it with class, and handled it with a lot of respect because I would be frustrated if I'm a driver on the last lap and got wrecked. But again, I think he did a really good job. He handled it with class, handled it with a lot of respect, and he did an epic and also absolute job. He's shown sometimes where he can be immature, and I think that yesterday was one of the most mature things I've seen for Bubba Wallace so far, and I think that he is going to continue to do that. As he's one of my favorite drivers, I love how he handled it, and I'm glad to see that he's become a driver I have a lot of respect for, and I think that he will do a better job as well as a driver on these super speeds, because I think he's one of the best super speed racers. Plus, Bubba Wallace, I think yesterday, genuinely had one of the best cars, if not the best car yesterday. I think he almost led the most laps yesterday. Blaney might have edged him out on that, but Bubba led a lot of laps yesterday and was really strong in the race. It's a shame. It was kind of hard to pass, but nonetheless, Bubba did a good job yesterday. It's a shame they wrecked in the last lap because Bubba definitely would have earned that win, and I hope that he can go back there and win another super speedway race going forward. Yes, he handed the win to Kyle Busch, but nonetheless, Bubba did a really good job in his interview and handled it and took responsibility for the last lap wreck. He blocked a couple times, took responsibility. You're going for a win, and you're going to do what you're going to do to win these races. Can't blame Bubba for trying to win the race, and I think that's the last lap. If he did that with 20, 30 laps ago, it would have been completely unacceptable, like we saw some other drivers have done in the past on super speedways, but it's the last lap of the race. He's going for the win. Can't blame them there. I saw some people crucifying him, and I think that Bubba Wallace is getting a little bit unjustified hate in that situation because he's going for the win. I can't blame him for trying to win a race, get his first win of the year, and he did everything, in my opinion, that he had to do to go out there and win. So I appreciate him taking responsibility, but again, it's the last lap. Well, I think Ryan Blaney probably done the same thing to you. Take responsibility if he made those mistakes, but I think Bubba handled it with a lot of class and a lot of maturity. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we are talking about Kyle Busch versus Corey Lajoie. Now, over this past weekend, Kyle Busch was interviewed by the media, and really it's about something that Corey Lajoie said on his podcast. Corey Lajoie actually admitted that he intentionally tried to wreck Kyle Busch, basically because he and Kyle Busch were really frustrated at each other. Now, Kyle Busch, he spoke to media this past weekend about that, and he says that Corey Lajoie has been a pain in the dick to race for years. And then later, as he commented later, Noah Lewis reported this, he says he slammed down into me and then admitted it on his podcast that he wanted to crash me and create a yellow. Didn't get penalized, even though Denny Hamlin did. Also, Kyle Busch is calling out the inconsistencies there of NASCAR. I do have to agree with Kyle Busch. I'm a little surprised that Corey Lajoie did not get a penalty, even though Denny Hamlin should not have gotten a penalty for the incident. I think if NASCAR was going to be a little more consistent, they should have penalized Corey Lajoie like they penalized Denny Hamlin, because a lot of drivers, I think, are going to be afraid to admit it now, and we saw this with Ryan Preece with Kyle Larson. Ryan Preece didn't even admit to wrecking Kyle Larson on purpose, because let's be honest, Ryan Preece intentionally tried to wreck Kyle Larson at Briscoe. Come on, if you watch that race, you knew that Ryan Preece is trying to wreck Kyle Larson right there. And in that incident, I think Corey Lajoie was absolutely trying to wreck Kyle Busch, because Kyle Busch had a better car and was a little frustrated, was trying to get by Lajoie, and Kyle was not intentionally running into Corey Lajoie. And even Lajoie thought that Kyle Busch was trying to wreck him to bring out a yellow, which really was not the case. Kyle Busch was trying to pass Corey Lajoie, and Corey Lajoie is definitely one of the hardest drivers to race around, but also Corey this year has raced a lot better as a driver. It's interesting, though, to see that both these drivers are frustrated with each other and have beef with each other, considering the fact that both of them are in the Chevy camp, and both were not having great races. Let's be honest, Corey Lajoie was falling back to the pack, was really good early in the races, almost in the top 10 at one point, but unfortunately in Martinsville, you saw a lot of contact, and I just saw it, and I was thinking, like, wow, we're about to have a wreck for 25th or 26th, which was about one of the most interesting parts of that race at Martinsville. And I think when you look at the incident, who's at fault for the wreck, or the near wreck to happen, I think you can put both drivers at fault almost for the situation. But it's very interesting to see that you got Corey Lajoie and even Kyle Busch calling out NASCAR for not penalizing Corey Lajoie and being inconsistent. And we've seen a lot of inconsistencies, especially over the last couple of years with NASCAR, because I do believe that if NASCAR wanted to actually be consistent for the wreck to end up happening, they probably should have penalized Corey Lajoie at least 25 points. And I think Denny Hamlin might discuss that on his podcast. Even though I don't think Corey Lajoie should have got a penalty, if we're going to be really consistent and be fair, we should penalize the driver the same way Denny Hamlin got. But again, NASCAR has a lot of times been extremely inconsistent with their penalty calls and how they've called penalties in the past as well. You look at how they handle stuff with Colligan and Hendrick, even though I will say they actually revised the points penalty, which at least NASCAR jumped in to make sure that it was very consistent there. Because NASCAR needs to start being more consistent going forward. And once again, they're proving how inconsistent they are. But will we see Kyle Busch and Corey Lajoie have more beef going forward? We'll have to wait and see, but it's interesting to see both drivers had beef, and it's interesting to see that both drivers had problems in this race. It's definitely very, very interesting. So, that is for today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe, and the channel notifications on so you know if I win a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram as we're my Patreon as well. Links are below that, and comment your thoughts below on today's video. Who do you think it was all fault for the incident? Do you think it was Corey Lajoie or Kyle Busch? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about Bubba Wallace taking responsibility for the last lap wreck? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later today on the channel, we'll have NASCAR Xfinity Series race picks on the channel for Dover. Then tomorrow on the channel, we'll have NASCAR Cup Series race picks on the channel for Dover, and probably another video on the channel later today. Then on Wednesday will be in our NASCAR news video, and probably something else on the channel Wednesday as well, followed by a special video dropping on Thursday. A lot of great content on the way on the channel, and I cannot wait to share it with you guys as the channel continues to grow. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to subscribe. We're trying to reach 2,000 subscribers here by the end of June. I would love to do that by the end of June. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys next time for more great, awesome NASCAR content and other motorsports content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.